at what happened in Minneapolis with George Floyd. There's absolutely no excuse for that, as we all know. We don't want it to happen here. Also, we know that South Carolina is a great place. We have been through many things before, and we've come through all of them very well. We have strong people. It's like a family, and we're very proud of that. South Carolina's been through a lot over the years, from our beginning in 1670, ups and downs, a lot of things, and we are strong people because of it. And we welcome conversation. We welcome protests. We welcome people speaking their mind, exercising their constitutional right in this country of freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, to peaceably assemble and express their concerns. We welcome it, and we learn from it every time. We're better because of it. But also, we do not tolerate lawlessness and violence and the destruction of property and harm to our people. So we are prepared. We are determined to see that things level off here in South Carolina and that we do not experience the tragedies that they've had in other places. We understand the anger, we understand the concern, we understand the bitterness, we understand the fear, but we also understand that there are innocent people, defenseless, who have sought no problems, have caused no trouble, and should not be punished, should not be hurt, or have their property destroyed, their lives or families threatened. So part of what you see here today is our South Carolina family. And I need to say this is a beautiful Sunday afternoon, and we called the people you see here this morning and asked if they, and some as late as about 11:30 or 12 o'clock, and asked if they would come and participate in this in order to speak for and to the people of South Carolina. And everyone is here. It's a remarkable group. We have outstanding leadership in South Carolina, and their willingness to come together and participate, particularly on such short notice, in such conditions as this with the virus still there, is quite remarkable. But I'll say, before I ask Senator Scott to speak, I'll say that we are prepared. We're prepared for hurricanes. We're prepared for tornadoes. We prepare for everything. We try to prepare our children for life. That's why we send them to school. We're also prepared to stop violence. And we have the law enforcement establishment in South Carolina is, I think, unique in the country. Everyone knows everyone. Everyone has worked together. They're great relationships. The collaboration, communication, and cooperation is, you've seen it before in hurricanes and things of that nature. And we are highly and well equipped to eliminate or to prevent violence. That is our hope, to prevent violence. Law enforcement all across the state is activated, on alert, and is ready. And I say to any of those who would do damage to our people, who would hurt their cause, who would destroy property, who would incite fear and violence, the law enforcement establishment of South Carolina will deal very sternly with you, very quickly and very sternly. The federal authorities are on alert. The state authorities are on alert. All of the county authorities are on alert. The city authorities are on alert. And we'd be delighted to have peaceful protests anytime, anywhere, but not violence. The National Guard of South Carolina is also on alert and will be available around the state as needed, particularly in Charleston, Columbia, and other places as well. And so let me introduce the people that are here with us today, and then we'll have several, we'll make remarks, and then we'll answer your questions. JT McLawhorn, President and CEO of the Columbia Urban League, is here. Ms. Brenda Murphy, President of the South Carolina Conference, NAACP, is here as well. Reverend Bishop Samuel Green, 7th District AME Church, is here. and Reverend Donald Green Jr., who is the president of the Baptist Education and Missionary Convention of South Carolina, is here as well. Also, Brigadier General David Jenkins, also Major General Van McCarty, both of the National Guard, Sled Chief Mark Keel, Probation, Pardon, and Parole Director Jerry Adger, DPS Director Rob Woods, and Sheriff Jay Coon from Lexington County, and also Josie McDaniel Burkett and Holly May, who are doing the signing. And before we start, I call on Chaplain Darden to lead us in prayer, please. Chaplain. And Kim Stinson of the Emergency Management Division.
Let us pray together. Our Father, we are so humbled today by your presence, by all that you're able to do, even in spite of the unrest and the violence. You're God, and beside you there is no other. So we thank you for this day, a day we've never seen before. You are the God of peace, and your Son is the Prince of Peace. And so today, we pray for peace in our country, in our nation, in our world. Even though the attack may be a hidden foe, but even in this unrest and in this situation, those things that have attacked us and that have come before us have shouted that there are some issues that we've got to address. So today, we thank you for what you're able to do. Give us what we need. Give us the wisdom, but in all of our getting, allow us to get an understanding so that you can be glorified. Violence is not the answer. We understand that rioting is the cry of the unheard. But let us understand that we hear, that you understand, and that you can make the difference. This is our prayer today. Change our hearts and our minds. Bless us in your name, we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Chaplain. Senator Tim Scott.
Thank you, sir. Governor, thank you for your leadership, and without any question, I am happy to be a South Carolinian. I'd like to say to all of the South Carolinians out there, there was a tragic incident in Minnesota. Let us not allow that to metastasize into tragedies throughout this nation, and specifically here at home. As I watched the video from Minnesota, my heart broke. I felt anger, I felt fear as an African American who enjoys jogging and walking and doing things out in society. I wondered how things had changed. And then I reflected back on what has happened here in South Carolina, thinking about the Walter Scott specific murder just 5 years ago. And I thought to myself, what came out of that? And I remember going around the state, meeting with law enforcement officers and African American leaders with Congressman Trey Gowdy at the time. We had no cameras, just leaders and law enforcement leaders having civil conversations about how to bring our state together. And I will tell you that so much progress can be seen. It is visible today in our state. It's one of the reasons why I have confidence in the law enforcement leaders of this state, because they listened. It's one of the reasons why I have confidence of the leaders and communities of color in this state, because they too listened to each other. If we are going to make significant progress in this state, and we are, it will happen because we all take a step back from how we feel, and we stop, and we listen. Here's what I'm asking you to listen to. First, if you are a protester, a nonviolent protester, who is selflessly saying enough is enough, and they want our voices to be heard, we admire and respect your vigilance. It's what we need. John Lewis, 50 years ago, helped us make leaps as a nation because of nonviolent protesting. But for those who are agitators, for those who believe that violence is a way to take advantage of this situation, that is selfishness. And we as a state cannot tolerate that. We as a people cannot tolerate that. It distracts from the very important issues of this day, from Minnesota to California, here in South Carolina. If we are in fact going to continue to make significant progress as a nation and as a state, we cannot have distractions, especially fueled by violence. I ask you, I plead with you, please conduct ourselves in the most nonviolent ways. Protest, be heard, be seen, but be orderly. Because it's not just your life that you're risking. It's not simply the lives of the law enforcement officers you're risking. It's the lives of people that you've never met, generations may not have even been born yet. How we conduct ourselves creates a pattern and a path to the future. Let's get there together, because we are South Carolina strong.
Thank you, Senator. JT McLawhorn. Thank you, sir.
Governor, thank you very much, and to all who are here. First of all, I want to commend peaceful protesters, because protesting is the foundation of our democracy. Protesting desegregated schools. Protesting allow people to be able to have entree into public accommodations. So protest is as generic to America as our democracy is. I think that when we have the type of protests where we have violence, to me, it tells that we have a broken system. When we think about protests, I think about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I think about his four-step process in dealing with injustice. First, he says that we have to research and find out what is the problem. Let's make sure we know what the problem is. And we know the problem is today is the many atrocities that have been perpetrated toward African American men by law enforcement. Not all law enforcement, but that is a problem. That is a concern today. And so you research that and say, yes, it's a concern. Secondly, you go to the authorities and you have a conversation with the authorities about it. And so apparently, if you can't have that conversation, then you go to protest. So I think if we take a step backwards, what we have to do is open up some channels to these voices in our community. Because we cannot tolerate this type of rioting. I recall some of the aftermath of the rioting after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968. Some community was devastated. They lost the only store they had available to them. They lost resources that they never, ever were able to recapture. So we must do it peacefully. Protest is a peaceful movement. But the reason we have protests because people feel that they are locked out. No one is listening to them. I think our challenge in South Carolina is to let people know that we have open doors. We have open channels that we can communicate. Again, I think it's evident by our governor who assembled us together to reach out to the community. So, Governor, I thank you again. Senator Scott, I thank you for your leadership. And it's my pleasure to introduce the distinguished leader of the South Carolina Conference of the NAACP, Mrs. Brenda Murphy.
Thank you, JT.
Good afternoon. I'd like to thank our governor for allowing me the opportunity to be here this afternoon. To Senator Scott, it's good to see you. I'm often in conversation with him via letters. I'm not going to say much today other than we've got to engage our young people. They need to be involved. We need to listen to them. A lot has gone on. We're not just talking about George Floyd. We're talking about the incidents that have happened in Kentucky, Texas, Georgia, and New York. I can go, there are a number of incidents have occurred. Fortunately, we have been lucky here in the state of South Carolina. I do want to say that I appreciate the relationship that the NAACP has with SLED, I can say that, with the Columbia Police Department and our Sheriff Department. I say that because I feel that they are willing to engage. Is there a need to continue to engage more? Yes, we need to. We have some challenges. We need to address those challenges. But I want to say, I feel comfortable with those that I have to work with here in our state. We, young people, use your voice. It's okay, but make sure you do it in the right way. State what your needs are, what your challenges are, but to be destructive and destroy property and riot is not the right way. We need to use that energy in such a manner that we can create change. So I encourage young people, and some not so young, that as you experience challenges, let's talk. Let's get together. Let's work together as a unit to make things happen. To the governor, I'm going to ask you to please make sure, as activities are being planned for, to engage us. I'm going to ask our policemen in all areas to please engage us, because that's how we are going to be able to resolve issues and problems. Governor McMaster, thank you again for inviting me, and I do hope that I have another opportunity to meet with you soon.
You will. Thank you, ma'am. Bishop Samuel Green.
Good afternoon, and to Governor McMaster, Senator Scott, and to all of the representatives here who are sharing in this press conference today. I am the father of 3 young, black, and gifted men. I'm also a father who sleeps on the edge of fear of getting that phone call that something has happened to one of my sons because they are young, black, and gifted. I also stand here as the Bishop of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, representing all of the AME churches in the state of South Carolina. And I represent what I believe is the faith community, the leaders of the faith community, along with Dr. Donald Green. 5 years ago, we experienced the tragedy of Walter Scott. We experienced the tragedy of 9 persons being killed in the basement of one of our churches in Bible study, prayer meeting. And the response of the families shocked the nation. It represented what I believe the true fabric of what South Carolina is about. They responded in love. They responded in forgiveness. This is a critical hour for the country and a defining hour for the church. The civil rights movement was birthed in the womb of the black church. The AME Church stands on the pillars of a liberating and reconciling people. My job as bishop is to do both. You can't claim to love Jesus and not pursue justice. We do so embracing non-violence, but with conviction. We don't loot, we lobby our legislators. We don't break glass, we break records and strongholds by going to the ballot box and voting in numbers unprecedented. Instead of violence, we vote. This love stands up for black lives, for the oppressed, and reconstructs the world that shall be. We can be radical and responsible at the same time. Let's turn the world upside down, yes, through love and peaceful protest, and let's organize for tomorrow. We must recognize that the story on the news now should not overshadow the injustice that happened in Minnesota. Don't let the news cycle tell the wrong story for your protest. Our protest is for injustice. Our protest is against racism. Our protest is against the inequalities that plague our communities. And if we are going to be successful, we are not going to reach that success with violence. So I encourage you to protest, but do it peacefully. Protest. Do not loot and break in other person's property. Protest. Do not fight against one another or protest against the evils of this world with violence as your format. This world has come a long way. There are good law enforcement officers, and there are some law enforcement officers who are not good. There are some good people in this world, and then there are some people in this world who are not good. But we cannot get what we need accomplished when the news cycle is only focused on the burnings, only focused on the looting, and all other matters that does not pertain or even live up to the level of the cause we are out there for. I, too, was hurt when I saw what happened in Minnesota to Charles Floyd. But my heart bleeds for Ahmaud Arbery, Sean Reed, Breonna Taylor, and many others across this world and this nation who have lost their lives because of injustice. Injustice in police brutality, injustice in racism, injustice in bigotry, injustice in this land. But here in South Carolina, let our voices be heard, but let our voices be heard in peaceful protest, with strategies to meet after the protest is over, with persons like Governor McMaster, Senator Scott, Jim Clyburn, and others in this state who are in leadership position to put together strategies and programs together that will help us to move forward beyond the issues that are plaguing our nation. And remember, all of your marching, all of your protesting will be in vain if the memory of Charles Floyd is desecrated by your violence. And also remember, unless we go to the polls, our real voice will not be heard. Let's protest, but be peaceful.
Thank you. Well, I think everybody can see why South Carolina is different from other places. I'm so proud of our people and all that we've accomplished, and we are going to accomplish a lot more for all the people. If there are any questions, we'd be glad to try to answer them. Yes, ma'am.
Talk about what it means that the National Guard is on alert.
They are available if needed. Law enforcement across the state in all capacities is standing up and ready to go. People have been called back from leave. We have a lot of law enforcement authorities in force that's available. We hope we don't have to use any of it, but if we do, it is there. Violence and destruction will not be tolerated, and then the National Guard is available to add to that force if and when necessary. Yes, ma'am.
When would you make the call to deploy the National Guard? At what point?
Yesterday at 5 o'clock.
Okay.
Governor, what's your reaction to the way the police in Charleston and Columbia yesterday handled the situation as it escalated?
I'm not familiar with all the details. I'd have to verify that, but I did see what took place in Columbia. I thought it was handled very well. Yes, ma'am.
Will you issue a statewide curfew?
That remains to be seen.
Obviously, right.
There are, some of the cities have curfews already. Yes, ma'am.
Obviously, aside from this, we're also dealing with a virus outbreak in the state. There were thousands of people that were protesting yesterday. I'm wondering, is it your recommendation to anybody that went to the protest that they should self-quarantine for 14 days or get a COVID-19 test?
Well, COVID-19 tests are available throughout the state at over 200 locations. About 60 of them are mobile. You can go to accelerate.sc.com and you can find out where they are if anyone wants a test. There were a lot of people who were wearing masks. There was not a lot of social distancing in a crowd. That, of course, exposes people to danger. We have stated that many, many times from this place as well as every other health authority in the country, I believe. When people get in crowds like that, they're putting themselves and others at jeopardy. They need to be very careful, but we can't control that.
Would it be your recommendation, though, that they do self-quarantine for 14 days?
That's up to the individual's going to have to make those decisions. Anyone who thinks they've been exposed ought to self-quarantine.
Governor, you issued a statement yesterday. I think you used the phrase outside agitators in talking about what led to some of the violence.
I'm sorry.
I think you used the phrase yesterday, outside agitators, in describing some of the people that may have been behind some of the violence. I'm just wondering if you can...
Well, there's no may about it. The law
no may about
enforcement,
it,
there's no doubt about it. There's a lot of very fine people, very peaceful people who are, as Bishop Green said, who are, we want to hear their voices. We want to know what their issues are, what their dreams are. We want to hear. This peaceful protest has been a part of this country from the very beginning, but it does not need to resort to violence. But we know from law enforcement authorities around the state, there are people who were not from those cities, and they may have even been from other states. How many? We don't know. We know there are a lot of very innocent people who go that get caught up in whatever's going on and a part of the crowd and mean no harm, but yet they end up forming a part of that crowd. Now, if there is movement, interstate movement, then of course there are federal ramifications involved there.
Would you encourage that information to be made public if law enforcement agencies know that some of these folks are coming from outside of the state?
If we have people coming from other states to South Carolina for any reason, intent on doing harm to the people or property of South Carolina, the law books are full of statutes that address those things, and we will certainly use those as necessary. Yes, ma'am.
Have you spoken to local law enforcement? Have you spoken to local law enforcement about the extent of last night's efforts? Do you know like what all was involved in last night's efforts and what was there? Can you talk about that?
Well, everything was involved in last night's efforts. As I mentioned, law enforcement across the state at the municipal level, the county level, the state level, all were activated and will be, or I would say even more activated and on alert now than they were this time yesterday.
Was tear gas used, rubber bullets,
Yes.
anything additional?
Yes.
Tear gas, rubber bullets, anything additional beyond that to your awareness?
Well, the authorities of course, do not want to use lethal force, of course. So that is why the effort is, the concentration is on crowd control, is on having a presence, on trying to reach the people as we're doing now, to let those ones who want to protest and are not looking to cause trouble need to know that if there are some in their group that are intent on causing trouble, they may be caught up in it as well. So they need to obey curfews. They need to be very careful with whom they associate with. Your mama told you, don't talk to strangers. Well, if you have people that are coming in that are urging you to do violent things, you need to get away from there as quickly as you can. Yes, sir.
Governor, the conversations that my colleagues had with protesters yesterday, I mean, they're angry, they're frustrated, they're exhausted, and they feel like in some cases for some of these protesters who did smash windows or burn up cars, they feel like that their voices are not being heard by the government, by the local officials, county, state, federal officials. You yourself, as well as the Vice President of the United States, had made comments about Colin Kaepernick when he kneeled during the national anthem, and that was considered a very peaceful protest. And I'm wondering, where do you see the difference? I mean, where do you see the difference? People feel like they do not have a good outlet to be heard in this country. They did the kneeling, that didn't work. Now they've gone to other extents. I mean, What is your response to that?
Well, as you heard from a number of the people here today, we want to hear those protests. We want to hear those points of view. We always, communication, collaboration, and cooperation is universally a formula for success and progress. What we urge people to do is don't get violent. You must draw the line at violence, because when you begin getting violent, nobody listens anymore. Yes, sir.
Governor, these protests began peaceful yesterday. We expect them to begin peacefully today. Yesterday, they took a turn. What are some of the issues that you're hearing from some of these peaceful protesters, things that you think that we can address right away here in South Carolina?
Well, I think it's been addressed here at this podium just a few minutes ago. There are people that feel that their concerns, their issues have not been addressed, and that's why the protests are there. And that's part of America. We have a right of assembly, a right of freedom of speech, and we treasure that. We had a revolution against England because of that, and we established those rights and wrote them down, put them in the Constitution, and they're still there. They're important. So we want to hear from people, but violence muddles the message. It changes the subject and ends up, I believe, in doing more harm than good. But there are a lot of things that we need to do in our state, a lot of things we need to do in the country. We all work together. We all do better and have more progress, more happiness, longer lives, healthier children when we talk to each other and work out our problems in a peaceful way.
And I'm assuming you would be happy to hear from some of these peaceful protesters as you would as well, Senator Scott, in terms of having that.
We heard from some of them on television yesterday, and some of them made good sense. It's easy to understand what they're talking about, because we heard the same thing right here. But when the rocks and bottles and things start getting broken and windows and doors smashed in and cars set on fire, there's no reason to do that. It's counterproductive.
Senator Scott, you can answer. You were on Fox News talking about the president's tweets. You called them not constructive. I'm wondering if you could kind of talk about what that conversation was like. Was the president receptive to some of the recommendations that you made?
I had a good conversation with the president yesterday morning and just really encouraged him to focus on Mr. Floyd more than the protesters, because ultimately I want to keep the main thing, which is the fact that, in my opinion, watching the video, Mr. Floyd was murdered. We want to take that issue and keep the focus on that issue. And one of the best ways to do that is for the president to tweet consistent with that. And when we find ourselves having a broader, larger conversation, it just simply dilutes what really is, in essence, the issue. And frankly, as I've said before, the fact of the matter is that the toxicity of the issue doesn't come from a single death. Terrible as it is, it's a pattern that is revealing itself again and again. And as I said this morning on Fox as well, had it not been for the video, it wouldn't have happened. Had it not been for the video in Georgia, it wouldn't have happened. Even though it happened, no one would have believed it. And so we are in the place now where we continue to advocate on behalf of more clarity on these issues. But anytime you get sidetracked at all, it dilutes our ability to solve these really important issues.
There are people looking to hear from the president. Do you think that the president should hold a national address to Americans?
There's at least my understanding is the president will be having a conversation with leaders around the country in the next couple of days. I think you'll hear more from the president as this unfolds. And yes, I do believe the president will continue to address the American people as it relates to this issue and the underlying issues. One of the things that we had good conversations about is the way forward, from quality education to economic opportunity to building wealth in America. There are significant issues that we can address that I believe creates a potential leap in this nation, not just steps forward. So I think you'll hear more of that conversation in the next few days.
Do you feel like he understands it? Do you feel like he understands the underlying issues that are this was across the United States yesterday.
Yeah, I think the president is paying close attention, and he's a smart guy, so certainly he understands the issues. The key is to make sure that we continue to express ourselves in a way that is constructive and that you can actually measure the results in reasonable time. And I believe that's what you'll see. That's what we have seen, frankly, in the last few years.
We have South Carolina are seeing a lot of police on the streets, and two of the, are, you know, especially,
me
well, this is sort of a question in general, maybe for one of your law enforcement folks. South Carolinians, especially in two of our largest cities, are seeing a lot of police officers on the streets right now. I guess my question is, you know, as a sheriff or as the chief of SLED, what is your message to folks and how they can express themselves without escalating to the point where that presence is going to be?
That's an easy one. Law enforcement or officers are trained not to escalate the situation. I believe we have the best law enforcement in the nation in South Carolina. What I would say to the people is the law enforcement officers are here to protect you and your property. I remember a story, some of you may have heard it years ago. A sheriff was being introduced. He was at a picnic or something, and a mother brought a little boy up and said, Sonny, if you get out of line, this sheriff is going to come get you, so you better watch out for him. He said, ma'am, wait a minute. I'm your friend. I'm here to protect that little boy. So, son, if you have a problem, come talk to me. That's the kind of message that we want to deliver to the people. Law enforcement have been trained to protect the people and their property so they can be happy, experience joy, get an education, and go up in the world. And we're trying to do a lot of things here in South Carolina to see that everybody has the opportunity to do just that. Yes, ma'am.
Just to build off of that a little bit, you know, we have reporters out at the State House right now who are talking about a stepped up, you know, SLED presence. We have CPD out there as well.
I can't hear you. Say it again, please.
So we have reporters out there at the State House already who are talking about a stepped up SLED presence, a stepped up Columbia Police presence from what they saw at the beginning of yesterday. So I'm curious, what has changed in your advisement to, you know, Sheriff Kuhn, to Sheriff Lott, to Chief Keel in terms of, you know, the way to respond to some of these protesters today? Has there been any change in what you've told them?
No, ma'am. They are fully capable and trained and authorized to take whatever steps are necessary to protect the people and property of the state of South Carolina. And they will do that. We do know from law enforcement all around the state, if there's a threat of violence, the threat of opposition to that violence, the mere presence of a counter force generally reduces the threat of violence. So people should not be expected. They ought to be happy when they see law enforcement in their neighborhood, because they are there, as the sheriff I mentioned a while ago said, they're there to protect people, not to hurt people.
Two more questions.
Yes, ma'am.
Has there been any discussion about what you all can do immediately to address these concerns? I mean, I think the message across the country seems to be, as we discussed here, that we're not being heard. In response to COVID-19, there were task forces immediately set up. Has there been any discussion on what can be done right now to address these issues?
We've discussed that earlier today, and I just made a promise to Ms. Murphy a moment ago, you may have heard. But that is always something that we're attempting to do. The things that events like what has happened in the country now that remind us that there's a lot more that needs to be done. And I'm sure that we all look forward to doing that, particularly here in the state of South Carolina, where we're all like family. Yes, ma'am. Coming in a minute. You go ahead.
Quickly, Ms. Murphy talked about, you know, teaching the right way to protest and getting in front of young people. You know, as we speak right now, it's 2 o'clock. Protesters who are going to be out there today are probably already out there or well on their way and potentially not listening here. How do we reach young people moving forward? Senator Scott, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well. How do we reach young people moving forward? Where does that conversation begin? Does it start here or does it start at home?
Well, this is a part of it. It's also at home. It's also at school. Senator?
Yeah, I think the governor hit the nail on the head. It's a multifaceted approach that will be effective. There's no one panacea to this issue. One of the things I do on a monthly basis is I visit a different school in the state, making sure that we have an opportunity to have a conversation. I think it's really important for us to have positive role models in schools. I was the kid that flunked out of high school as a freshman, so I understand the impact of a negative environment, negative self-esteem, what that does to an individual. So I like going into schools. I like having conversations with parents. I like having conversations with community leaders. One of the reasons why I'm so focused on opportunity zones and workforce development is because I know that if you can see a better life, it's like a harness on the soul. It gives you more energy and more focus. And so that is an important part of the equation, but you start that at home. You do that in schools. One of the reasons why I think our churches need to figure out how to be as open as possible while using social distancing to be there. There's a faith factor that is glue in our society. Hebrews 11:1 allows us to see something that does not yet exist because we know it will come. So when we have that, it allows for all of us to move forward together. So I do think it's multifaceted, and it is quite effective, but it just takes longer than 24 hours.
And I just have a question for you, Senator. Has there been a discussion about any type of policy changes to address these issues?
Well, it depends on which issue you're talking about, but I would say that the first thing, I had a conversation with the Attorney General Barr, as it relates to Arbery, as well as Ms. Floyd. So there are things happening in so many of these issues and instances that didn't happen 20 years ago, didn't happen 30 years ago. But as it relates to the broader issue of creating a more fair and more just society, it's one of the things I've encouraged the President to do is to have Attorney General Barr lead a conversation about race and justice and let it start on the federal level and let it seep into every state in this nation. We oftentimes look at South Carolina and say, wait, you know what? The South is the problem. Well, Minnesota is not part of the South. So what we've seen in South Carolina and around the Southeast is the fact that we've seen leaps in the right direction. We just need to continue to do so.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate you coming. For all of you that came with us on this beautiful South Carolina Sunday, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you.